Ah, America, the land of the free. Sorry, I can't take this seriously. It's 4th of July. I'm not really one to celebrate 4th of July, I guess. I mean, like, I do, like, regular things, like I blow up fireworks and all that, but I don't know. I guess I don't do it in the name of America, but more so the fact that it's just, you know, an excuse to hang out with your family and friends. But I did think this year on this channel I would cover a novel by Franz Kafka. His first, albeit unfinished, novel, Amerika. Last year I covered The Metamorphosis by Kafka, and I'm not super proud of that video. It was kind of a mess. While I'm still new to making videos, I was very new to making videos then, and it just was not something that I was proud of. It's not a video that I was proud of making. So this year I thought I'd take another stab at Kafka's work. I went and got some food for the occasion. Good old American McDonald's cheeseburger. America, fuck yeah! Some French fries. This is not sponsored, by the way. So, you know, McDonald's French fries are actually probably my least favorite fast food French fry. While Kafka would never actually visit the United States in his lifetime, he did read travel memoirs, as well as the ever-popular American, the autobiography of Ben Franklin. There are a lot of things he does get wrong about America, such as San Francisco being in the East, and the Statue of Liberty looking a little different. Some other influences that he reflected on later would be that of Charles Dickens, specifically the novel David Copperfield. My intention was, as I now see, to write a Dickens novel, enriched by the sharper lights which I took from our modern times, and by the pallid ones I would have found in my own interior. As I mentioned, it was left unfinished, and we're not even sure if Kafka wanted this book to be titled Amerika, if it was even, you know, he didn't even want it to be published, so we're not even sure if Amerika is the actual title of the book. His friend Max Brod, when he published it, titled it Amerika because Kafka often said or referred to it as the American novel, but he also titled it The Man Who Disappeared and The Stoker, as it's based off of a short story by Kafka of the same name. The novel consists of constant misadventures and misunderstandings as Carl floats from job to job, and he learns to adjust to the land of Amerika. It depicts an immigrant experience from someone who never actually left their own home country, but who felt the own alienation and isolated feelings that often come with being an immigrant. With all the preamble out of the way, let's get into Franz Kafka's Amerika. If you like literature, reading, as well as obscure topics, consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more videos like this. I appreciate every subscriber I get, and I try to improve my channel with every video I make. With that said, thank you, and let's move on with the video. As the 17-year-old Carl Rossman, who had been sent to Amerika by his unfortunate parents because a maid had seduced him and had a child by him, sailed slowly into New York Harbor, he suddenly saw the Statue of Liberty, which had already been in view for some time, as though in an intenser sunlight. The sword in her hand seemed only just to have been raised aloft, and the unchained winds blew about her form. Carl arrives by ship and passes by Liberty Island, where he encounters Lady Liberty, but it's not the usual Lady Liberty that we're used to. This one's holding a giant sword instead of a torch to light the way. I'm pretty sure this was unintentional on Kafka's part, but either way, it leaves a haunting message for the reader, as well as the protagonist, the incoming immigrant, Carl Rossman, that he will find no light or freedom in the place that he's coming to. Just as the ship docks and all the inhabitants are beginning to leave, Carl remembers that he left his umbrella below deck, so he trusts his suitcase with that of a stranger that he'd just met, and goes below deck, where he runs into a man called the Stoker. Basically, he's a guy that works on the ship, that works in the boiler, and helps fuel the steamships of the time. He talks with the stoker about his newly arrival to America, as well as trusting his suitcase to that of a stranger. Him and the stoker start talking, and the stoker starts telling Carl about his misfortunes with his job and how he doesn't really like his job very much. This is specifically due to his boss by the name of Schubel, who demeans and berates him almost constantly. Carl says that the stoker should not really stand for that, and eventually the stoker takes his advice, and once the inhabitants leave the upper deck, the stoker and Carl go up to the upper deck to confront the stoker's employers about the stoker's current situation. It's here where Carl will have his first encounter with the tyranny of the American workforce. At first, the chief cashier dismisses Carl and the stoker and basically says to go away, but the captain interrupts them and decides to hear the stoker's problems out. The stoker sort of stumbles his way through explaining his grievances with his boss until eventually his boss, Schubel, arrives on the scene. Schubel is basically trying to defend himself from all these accusations and grievances that the stoker has about him, but really it's just a constant bickering match between them until it's interrupted by Carl's uncle, who asks Carl if he's his nephew, and because they've never really met, and Carl's like, yeah, I'm your nephew. Sorry about that. That McDonald's burger was coming up. And after this, Carl and his uncle Jacob decide to part from the ship and head to Jacob's home. Before leaving the ship, Carl asks the stoker why he's letting these people treat him with such injustice, and the stoker doesn't really know how to reply. "Why don't you say anything?" he asked. "Why do you let them get away with it?" The stoker furrowed his brow as though looking for words for what he wanted to say. He looked down at his hand and Carl's. "You suffered an injustice more than anyone else on the ship. I'm convinced of that." And Carl slipped his fingers back and forth between those of the stoker, whose eyes were shining and looking around as though feeling inexpressible bliss, and at the same time daring anyone to take it away from him. "You must stand up for yourself. Say yes and no. Otherwise people will never learn the truth. I want you to promise me to do that, because I'm very much afraid that soon I won't be able to help you anymore." Carl was crying as he kissed the stoker's cracked and almost lifeless hand, holding it and pressing it to his cheek, like some dear thing from which he had to be parted. Once he's at Jacob's home, Carl begins a claustrophobic sort of routine where he barely really leaves Jacob's apartment. He practices English and his studies, as well as a piano that Jacob bought for him. But other than this, he doesn't really leave the apartment. Once, though, she said, "Carl," and led him, still astonished at the unexpected address, sighing and grimacing, into her little room, and bolted it. Then she almost throttled him in an embrace, and while asking him to undress her, she actually undressed him, and laid him in her bed, as though she wanted to keep him all to herself from now on, and stroke him and look after him until the end of the world. "Carl, oh my Carl," she said, as if she could see him and wanted to confirm her possession of him, whereas he couldn't see anything at all, and felt uncomfortable in all the warm bedding which she seemed to have piled up expressly for his sake. Then she lay down beside him and asked to hear some secret or other, but he was unable to tell her any. Then she was angry with him, or pretended to be angry, he wasn't sure which, and shook him. Then she listened to the beating of his heart and offered him her breast for him to listen to, but Carl couldn't bring himself to do that. She pressed her naked belly against his, reached her hand down. It felt so disgusting that Carl's head and neck leapt out of the pillows, down between his legs, pushed her belly against his a few times. He felt as though she were a part of him, and perhaps for that reason he felt seized by a shocking helplessness. We also learned more about the event that led to Carl being sent to America. It was an older woman, a maid. It was a family maid that basically cornered Carl in his bedroom and did whatever she wanted to, while Carl just laid there uncomfortable. She basically just assaulted him. I mean, he was just a teenager who had no interest to begin with in her. And second, he's a teenager. Or I guess, again, he's a teenager. And this is an old woman. And I guess because of this assault, she becomes pregnant. And his parents send him off, not wanting to deal with the publicity, send him off to Amerika, which is the reason why he arrived and met his uncle. Even though he's learning English, and he's able to practice piano. He doesn't stray far from his uncle's home or his uncle's rule. That is until a friend of Carl's uncle, Mr. Polunder, comes by and asks Carl if he would like to come to his manor. Carl's uncle disapproves of this, but Carl goes anyways, against his uncle's wishes. After arriving at the manor of Mr. Polunder, Carl meets a woman by the name of Clara, and when Clara goes to show Carl his room for the night, tries to seduce him, and he's not really into that, because it brings up memories of the maid. At least, that's what I think. It seems to be kind of subtle. It's a lot more subtle. He doesn't bring up the maid, but he's very uncomfortable with the situation regardless. He does not want to be seduced. He does not want to have sexual relations.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
He does not want to have sex with his woman. And because of this, he's pretty much deeply offended by this and decides he wants to leave this place. And he tells this to Polunder, but there's also a man by the name of Mr. Green at the manor who's visiting as well as Carl. And Mr. Green gives Carl this letter from his uncle already, which is kind of odd that he already had him deliver a letter to him. But due to Carl disobeying his uncle and going to the manor, his uncle Jacob is kicking him out because of this one instance of disobeying his uncle. So Carl is left with nothing but a ticket to San Francisco, which for some reason it's in the east. I don't know if that was a mess up on Kafka's part, but he doesn't take that ticket. Instead, he goes dashing through the night until he makes it to an inn where, with a little money, the little money he has, he decides to take up board in this inn where he meets two immigrants by the name of Robinson and Delamar. Robinson is an Irishman and Delamar is a Frenchman. So Carl begins traveling around with this Robinson and Delamar. I'm not sure if it's Delamar or Delamar. Delamarche. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm gonna say Delamar. So Carl begins traveling around with Robinson and Delamar, and they're out searching for work in a place called Butterford. There's that hamburger. Ugh. And so they're traveling out looking for work, and they arrive at this hotel. Carl, Delamar, and Robinson are just sitting around, and then Carl decides to go look in the hotel for work. When he goes to the hotel, he sees this giant buffet, and he's not really sure what to do or what to say because his English is still not very good because he only had like 2 months of English lessons when he was with his uncle. Eventually, he starts talking with the head cook, and the head cook gives him some food and everything and basically says if he needs a job to come back by. And with his food, he goes out to see his companions, but his suitcase had been rifled through, and he's not very happy about that. And he decides to leave, but before he leaves, he notices the one last thing that he had from home. It's sort of a keepsake that he had, a picture of him and his family, is gone. He has no clue where it is. And Delamar and Robinson are both saying that they have no clue where it is either. They don't have it. And he leaves and goes back to the hotel and meets with the head cook, who gets him set up with lodgings with all the other lift boys, which is what Carl's job is. He becomes a lift boy at this hotel. And it's basically like a bellhop, I believe. He basically just works constantly and then goes back and sleeps in the bunks. That's all he does. It's just constant work as a bellhop and go to sleep. But he also makes a friend while he's there, this woman by the name of Therese. And him and Therese sort of strike up a friendship eventually, and they... Holy shit, dude. I don't know if you guys heard that. Fireworks are going off already. It's a Thursday. Come on, man. It's not even 4th of July yet. I'm trying to record a video about serious literature here, and they're out there blowing up shit. So him and Therese are talking, and Therese says basically he wants Carl to promise her not to be around Robinson and Delamar anymore because she doesn't trust them, and he promises. But that promise is quickly broken. One night, though, while Carl's working his job as the lift boy, Robinson appears very drunk and asks Carl for some money, and Carl decides to give him some money. But he also wants to make sure Robinson is okay, and he asks another lift boy to take his shift for him, and he goes and helps Robinson out. He lets Robinson sleep in Carl's bed in the dormitory with the other lift boys, and Robinson passes out. But because he let somebody else take his shift, he gets in trouble with this, and he is instructed to go to the head waiter's office. And so he goes to the head waiter's office, and while there, the head porter is also there. And I'm not really sure what a head porter does. Like the head of the importing, I guess, for the hotel. I'm not sure what he does, but the head porter and the head waiter both chastise him, and they're very, like, power trippy. They have, like, a huge power trip. They chastise him for leaving his shift. Carl tries to explain himself, but they don't really care about any of that. And eventually the head cook arrives, sort of to save Carl from any problems that is happening with the head waiter and the head porter. But it turns out she can't, because whenever she finds out that he let Robinson stay in the dormitory, she basically says, "I can't defend this. Sorry, I can't help you out here. You're screwed," basically. And he's fired from his job because of Robinson and his drunken antics. While Robinson was in the dormitory, he got drunk and started fighting all of the lift boys. Because he was so drunk, he just started fighting them because he was saying, "Carl Rossman let me sleep in this bed. This is my bed. I get to sleep here." And he starts fighting all of the other lift boys. That's how Carl gets found out that he let Robinson stay there. So Carl and Robinson are basically escorted out by a taxi and are told to leave, and they head to where Delamar is staying. It doesn't get better for Carl from here. It actually gets worse. Once he arrives at the neighborhood that Delamar is staying at, he gets questioned by a police officer for pretty much no reason there whatsoever. And then he decides to run away from the police officer, and he almost gets caught until Delamar helps him out and hides him away in their house. And he basically holds Carl hostage, pretty much. If you don't accept my gratitude and be very nice to me, then I'm just going to turn you into the police. And yeah, he basically blackmails Carl to staying at his house. And while they're at Delamar's house, we find out that Delamar is staying with this woman by the name of Brunelda, and Brunelda is pretty much as terrible as Delamar is. She and Delamar basically make Robinson their glorified servant who does everything from clean to help bathe her, and then they also make him sleep on the terrace. They don't give him a bed. They just make him sleep on the terrace. Carl is also subjected to this when he arrives. Carl and Robinson sleep on the terrace, and Robinson's telling him, like, "Hey, you can take over for me. You can take over this job from me and help me out because I'm getting too tired, and you're younger than I am, so you should have this job." And he's like, "Well, it's not." He's thinking, like, "Well, I'm just going to be free. This is not really a job. I'm just going to leave." And while he tries to leave, Delamar beats the crap out of him and knocks Carl out. So after getting knocked out, he basically submits to Delamar for a while, and him and Robinson both basically act as servants for Brunelda and Delamar. Delamar and Brunelda basically just come up with evil, basically terrible chores for them to do just because they just want to see them just do work for them just because. The book ends, at least the main part of the book that the main part of the book that Kafka finished, it ends with Delamar just handing Carl some crumbs as a way of reward. After this, there are some fragments that are sort of loosely put together that Kafka had worked on, but I'm not exactly sure if those were part of the novel or intended for the novel. I'm not sure how they were put together. Carl somehow gets away from Brunelda and Delamar in some way. The Kafka didn't write any of that part. The end of the novel, or at least as far as Kafka got with it, it ends with Carl finding employment with the Nature Theater of Oklahoma, which is supposedly able to find jobs for anyone. And it ends with Carl basically riding towards Oklahoma, and he's finally able, for the first time in the novel, to see sort of an expansive America. Because throughout the rest of it, it is all claustrophobic. He's confined to some sort of interior space, or confined to work, or confined to some other place that he doesn't really want to be. And this is the first time in the whole book, by the end of it, that he gets to see the expansive part of America. And it ends on sort of a positive note, I guess. I mean, he gets employment, but we're not even sure if that's how Kafka intended to end the novel. That's just how it ends. As someone from Oklahoma, Carl should not take up employment there. I mean, he should just stay far, far away. Anyways, let's go on to the analysis. As it is an unfinished novel, it's difficult to say exactly what Kafka was trying to say with it. With what is there, we are able to pick out some themes and overarching ideas that you're able to make your own picture of it. While Amerika is not a perfect novel or even a complete one, it definitely has something that it's trying to say. With this being Kafka's first novel, the comparison between this and his last unfinished novel, The Castle, is night and day. While there are hints of Kafka's signature alienated style and themes of isolation that he would later be known for, it much more leans into that of Kafka's idols than that of his own intuition. As stated earlier in the beginning of the video, Kafka took great inspiration from Charles Dickens when it came to this novel, specifically David Copperfield, as well as Great Expectations, but to a lesser extent. If you don't know what David Copperfield is about, here's a slight rundown. David Copperfield tells the story of the title character's evolution from young age to maturity and the adventures he has in between. A Bill Doug's Roman, or as it's also commonly called, a coming-of-age story, was a very popular genre at the time, and one that I think has come to modern audiences as the YA novel. It's interesting to think of Kafka's Amerika as his own interpretation of David Copperfield with his own sort of spin on it. It's basically him putting a spin on Charles Dickens's David Copperfield. While David Copperfield and generally Charles Dickens' other works are a lot more positive and less cynical, Kafka looks at the coming-of-age story and sees only isolation, alienation, and the unknown. In the very beginning of the novel, as Carl arrives in Amerika, he is greeted not with the familiar Liberty holding her torch out to light the way, but one holding up a sword, as if to say, "Stay away." This is certainly an accident, as the book Kafka used as a reference, the photo of Lady Liberty looks like she's holding a sword. It's still a happy accident, but one that works so perfectly for what the novel conveys about the land Carl travels. No matter how big and free Amerika is supposed to be, Carl Rossman's experiences throughout the novel are nothing short of being inhumane, claustrophobic, and imprisoned. He's weighed down by a system and culture of labor that wants nothing more than to use you until it can't anymore. Even when he is just and puts in the work, he is fired from his job for misunderstandings and accusations of thievery. Many times throughout the book, he attempts to free himself from this system, but anytime Carl tries to make his own choices and believe in his own freedom, he is punished for it. In a land that preaches freedom, liberty, justice for all, there is an alarming lack of it. Carl is constantly caught between one pestering authority and the next, each one punishing Carl for believing he has the freedom of choice, or free will, over his situation. This authority shadows over the characters of Amerika, wagging its finger at them in demeaning ways and showing itself to be an altogether claustrophobic rule, and one that none of them can escape from regardless of their attempts to. The head porter at the hotel doesn't find it satisfying enough to fire Rossman from his job as a lift boy, but must humiliate and physically punish him. "It is my duty," said the head porter, and shook Carl as though to get him to face him, in the name of hotel management, at least to some extent, to catch up on what the head waiter, for whatever reason, has failed to do. "We always stand in for each other here, otherwise such a great enterprise would be impossible. You may say that I'm not your immediate superior, but that only makes it more credible of me to interest myself in this otherwise neglected business. Besides, as head porter, I am in a certain sense put in charge of everything, because I am in charge of all the hotel entrances, this main entrance here, the 3 central, and 10 side entrances, not to mention the innumerable little doors and other exits. Of course, all the service teams concerned have a duty of unconditional obedience to me, In return for these signal honors, I am charged by the management not to let anyone out who is in the slightest degree suspicious to me. You, I would say, are strongly suspicious. And delighted with that, he lifted his hands off Carl and let them fall again, which made a smacking noise and hurt. As Carl is in adolescence, this is the usual role that takes shape for most adolescents, rebelling against authority, and the authority punishing them for it. You know, I'm an outcast, and if you're treated like a dog the whole time, you end up thinking that's what you are. I'm glad you're here, Rossman. At least I've someone to talk to now. No one in the building talks to me. When you're given nothing but scraps and are constantly stuck at the bottom, you start to believe that's what you deserve. The character of Robinson is a prime example of this. He's a character who is given nothing and treated like a dog by his closest friend Delamar, but he would rather deal with what he's used to than to say no and deal with the consequences of rebellion. Yes, said Carl, but what applies to you doesn't have to apply to me as well. Besides, these sort of things only hold good if you agree to be bound by them. But, exclaimed Robinson, why shouldn't it apply to you too? Of course it applies to you as well. Stay here quietly with me until it rings. Then you can see if you can get away. Why don't you get out of here yourself? Just because Delamar is your friend, or rather used to be, what kind of life is this? Wouldn't you be better off in Butterford, where you were headed for originally? Or in California, where you have some friends? Yes, said Robinson. Who could have predicted it? Kafka's Amerika is a novel that portrays the twisted and unfair system of tyrannical bureaucracy where we're all treated like teenagers who disobeyed and deserve to be punished. A search for justice and truth is impossible when hierarchical structures are constantly pushing their authoritarian weight against you at any attempt one makes to protest. It exerts their own wills and wishes while pretending it's fair and listens to everyone else's. Being an American this year has certainly been a pretty stressful experience, I should say. And this 4th of July is a bittersweet one. I've never really been one to celebrate America, as I don't really care about any country, much less my own. The way of living in modern America is either being in a constant state of anxiety, finding a way to numb yourself, or being so blissfully ignorant you don't really even notice there's anything going on in the first place. I have so much anxiety about politics, the news, people, that I'll probably die of cancer or a heart attack by 35. But on a more positive note, actually no, I guess there's not really much of a positive note other than life goes on and everything decays. Anyways, thanks for watching, and hope you have a good 4th of July.